COVID started, obviously we had these shelter in place orders, and they're still pretty much in place today. So you're having a lot of people kind of constantly in contact with each other. Has your office seen an increase in protective order applications since COVID stay-at-home orders began? Have you seen an increase, decrease? It's pretty much stayed the same. What's been your experience in the COVID era with protective orders?
Yeah, no, for sure. Our numbers have increased a lot. I mean, just this morning alone, I think the admins were telling me we've already gotten at least 15 calls before 12 o'clock.
Wow.
People who wanted to apply for a protective order. But some of the numbers that I have here in front of me, just this year alone, from January to now, we've already had 900 applications filed.
Wow.
And our numbers have increased a lot since March. They have, but I mean, just to give an example, back in 2016, we had 1,400 applications, and last year that went up to over 1,600. So every year these numbers increase. We have a lot of protective order application, or a lot of protective orders that are granted every year.
Hello, listeners. I'm Victoria Muñiz. I'm here for the Ef'n Sunny Show, and I have my co-host, Richard Gonzalez. You want to say
What's
hey,
up,
Richard?
guys?
And
hey,
we
everybody.
have two very special guests today. We have Amy Cantu from the District Attorney's Office, as well as Rosie Martinez.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, everyone. So we have a pretty serious episode this time. Efrain and I were talking about a case that came out of McAllen recently where a woman had filed for a protective order. She had made a report about her husband. He had violated the protective order, and then he is now charged with kidnapping and murdering her. And we think that it's a really it's a somber topic, but it's actually a really important topic. And so our first, obviously our first choice to get information from the experts is with you all from the District Attorney's Office. So Amy, can you explain what your position is there at the DA's office and what you do?
Yes, of course. I've been working for the District Attorney's Office for 16 years. I started doing protective orders, so I have been prosecuting protective orders for the last 16 years. And we recently created a domestic violence unit. So for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been prosecuting domestic violence cases as well.
And in that unit, that's what y'all's focus is specifically?
Yes, that's our focus. We prosecute all family violence cases. And of course, we handle all the protective orders that come through our office.
Wow. And Rosie, what position do you have there at the DA's office, and how long have you been there?
I'm the Victims Unit Director, and I've been there for 5 years. But prior to coming to work for this administration, I did a lot of work in community-based victim services. So I've been doing victim services for 20 years already. But here in the District Attorney's Office, our unit is tasked to provide all the victim services and ensure that victims are afforded the rights during the prosecution process. So we have victim advocates practically in all the divisions within our office, felony, misdemeanor, domestic violence unit, human trafficking unit, and of course, most of the focus that our advocates do is around domestic violence cases that are filed in our office.
What would be considered family violence? You know, I know that there are, you know, at least for me, you know, they're very, as a lawyer, I was former prosecutor, and I know when I would have, you know, family violence cases, you know, Rosie, we would have to do basically your job. So I'm glad that, you know, thank you for coming in, because I know personally, I know Victoria does, it's a lot of work and it can become very, very tedious. But for our listeners, can you all tell us what is considered family violence?
Yes, so family violence for the purposes of a protective order is an act by a member of a family or household against another member of that family or household that's intended to cause physical harm, bodily injury, assault, or sexual assault. And it can also be a threat that's intended to cause that physical harm.
So there's not, like, it doesn't have to be something, it doesn't have to rise to the level of, you know, actual physical violence. A threat would be enough for you know, for a protective order, basically.
A threat would be enough if we consider everything else that is happening at the time. A lot of our cases that come through our office, there's threats along with stalking. So we consider everything that the victim is telling us.
And I think it's important to mention that family violence is not just spousal abuse. We deal with a lot of family violence with different family members. It could be any family member that's living in the same household. So it's not just intimate partner violence. We have victims that, you know, are brothers against brothers or parents against kids or vice versa. So that all encompasses the family violence. So we work with all those types of cases, not necessarily just intimate.
What exactly is a protective order?
So a protective order is a court order issued by any of our courts here. And in that court order, the judge is basically ordering the respondent, who's the person that you're filing against, not to commit any acts of violence against you, not to have any communication with you, not to threaten or harass you, and to stay 200 yards away from you. So that the court is going to order that person to stay away from you. Protective orders can be anywhere between 2 years up to a lifetime, depending on the circumstances.
And what are the consequences of violating a protective order?
What we want to tell the public is to make sure if you do have a protective order, whether that be a temporary protective order or a final protective order, to always carry a certified copy with you. The consequences of violating that order is that the person is going to be arrested. And that is a separate charge. So not only will they face, you know, if they assaulted you, they're going to face charges for assault, if they're stalking you for stalking, but they're also going to charge them for violation of a protective order.
Mm-hmm.
And so violating a protective order, it doesn't necessarily have to be another offense as in an assault. If they're ordered to not communicate with that person and they do communicate, that's violating the protective order. Is that correct?
That's correct. But depending on the circumstances also, you know, if they're harassing him, they can also charge him for harassment. But yes, you're right. It doesn't need to have that separate charge.
Okay. And I guess
and in prosecution, Victoria, we use that as an additional tool because it's another form to stop continuous family violence. If the victim does have a protective order, that allows us to be able to either felonize it if there's a continuous family violence or there's 3 or more violations. So it's not only good per se in the protecting the safety of the victim, but it's a tool that we use in prosecution to be able to stop that continuance of violence. And a lot of the cases, I mean, you guys were prosecutors, we've even requested GPS monitoring to be attached to some of those cases because of the continuation of violations of protective orders. So I think that not necessarily filing it in the civil, once it becomes a criminal matter, we use that also to try and increase the protections for that victim that we're working with.
Here through our domestic violence unit, we do have the misdemeanor assaults, terroristic threat, harassment cases, along with the protective orders. So we prosecute both at the same time. I know that you guys asked specifically about family violence, but we don't just handle family violence protective orders. There's all sorts of protective orders that we handle. It's either family violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. So those are the ones that we handle here through our office.
And what would be the process, you know, for, you know, anybody out there who is a, you know, a victim of some type of family violence? You know, what would be step number 1 if they were out there trying to seek a protective order?
Okay, so before COVID, they would actually need to come into our office and apply for a protective order. And once they apply, they would speak to our victim advocate. But since March, since COVID, we are doing all our applications over the phone. So they don't actually have to drive over here anymore. They can call our number, which is 956-292-7613. One of our victim advocates will call them. They'll fill out the application over the phone with them. And at that point, it'll get assigned to an attorney to make a decision on the case.
And
Okay.
when the victim speaks to the advocate over the phone, we cover a safety plan with them to let them know how to keep safe during this process, because they have to understand that it's a court process, that they're not going to get the protective order filed right away. So we ensure that they understand that there's other resources available for their safety while we navigate through the protective order process. So The advocates, when they talk to them on the phone, cover anything from emergency shelter, the hotline numbers, calling law enforcement if they're in imminent danger, housing options. I mean, there's an array of resources available, crime victims compensation, so that we make sure that the victims' needs are met while they go through the legal process. And we highly recommend them to seek shelter during this process, or if there's an arrest, to get an emergency protective order through the magistration, so that we're able to work in the civil unit with the protective orders.
And more or less, how long on average does it take? Does a protective order process take? Is there, is it a couple of weeks, a couple of months? What would these people be? What should they be expecting?
Every case is different. Once a case is accepted through our office, we do file it right away, and it has to get set within 14 days with the court. However, we do need to serve the other side, and a lot of times we don't have an address to serve them. So those cases take a little bit longer because we do have to serve them. But if we can get a case served within 2 weeks, our first court hearing, then within 2 weeks, you're going to have a protective order.
That's a pretty good turnaround.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you all encountered the process, and I can speak from experience, and I'm sure Richard can too, where you have a victim who's come in, they want to, file for a protective order, and then they change their mind, or maybe you get the impression that they're being pressured to change their mind. What kind of process do you all go through to try to navigate that?
Rosie, you want to talk about the safety planning that y'all do?
Right. Any victim that is considering either dismissing a protective order or any type of criminal case within our office, they have to meet with a victim. Well, right now we're just doing everything over the phone, but in the past they would have to meet with a victim advocate, and we cover a lengthy safety plan and go over everything that they have to do, especially if there's a criminal case involved and a protective order. And I know that in the civil division with the protective order, when they're trying to dismiss the protective order, there's other things that are implemented before that protective order is even dismissed. Amy has a little bit more information on what the court does when a victim is requesting for that protective order to be dismissed.
Right. So before we would ask the victim to appear in court, and they need to put testimony on the record to advise the court why they are asking for dismissal. But the court is always going to order that person to attend a program through Mujeres Unidas, which is the Batterers Intervention and Prevention Program. So they do need to complete that course before the judge will consider any type of dismissal on that case.
And that Mujeres Unidas is a pretty lengthy, rigorous course. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, it's a 24-week program.
That's what I thought.
And on the victim side, when the abuser is going through BIB, the Mujeres Unidas also works with the victim in providing counseling, therapy, or any other type of service that the victim needs to be able to recover from the abuse that they've suffered. So not only is he going to BIB for services, we're also working with the victim on the other hand to provide them with the necessary counseling or therapy that they need.
In previous years, when I was a prosecutor, a lot of the times victims would come in and maybe feel like they don't really have resources, or they have nowhere to go, or they have no assistance. So what kind of assistance or what kind of specific things can you all, I guess, point them into the right direction to?
So if we're already have a case filed with us, that means that there was an arrest, and more than likely the victim pressed charges. So that makes the victim eligible to apply for crime victims compensation. And the crime victims compensation program is a fund that is collected by the Attorney General of Texas and is given back to victims to pay for certain expenses related to the crime. It's not taxpayer money, it's fines and court fees that people that commit crime are charged, and that goes into that crime victims fund. So in particular for domestic violence, when we have a domestic violence case, they're eligible for relocation expense. And that relocation expense covers their rent for 3 months, deposits, even storage fees or moving fees if they have to move and relocate somewhere else. And that's covered through crime victims compensation. It also allows them to apply for loss of support So for instance, if the abuser is going to get sentenced or they're still in jail or awaiting trial and they've lost that support and they have children with this abuser, then they can apply for that loss of support and they will get monetary assistance for a period of time while we prosecute the case. The other thing that they can apply for is lost wages. A lot of victims will lose work days because of injuries or because they're having to come to court. They're having to navigate through the system. So that makes them have to lose work and in turn lose their income. So CBC also covers lost wages. It covers counseling service, not just for the victim, but for their children or any family member that was impacted by the crime.
Oh,
And it
wow.
also covers daycare. A lot of the times when victims need to come to court, they don't have anywhere to leave their kids. So CBC will cover their daycare so that they can come in and be part of the prosecution process without having to worry, where is my child going to stay while I have to go to court. And that's just through crime victims compensation, but there's other stuff that we do. In particular, if they're trying to establish some type of child support orders, and they feel that by doing so it's not going to be a safe thing to do, there is a program through the Office of the Texas Attorney General Child Support that the victim can request what is called a good cause waiver, and that will waive them having to open a child support case if that would pose a risk to them. Especially if they're in a shelter or they're hiding from the abuser, they can receive TANF, Medicaid, and food stamps without having to comply with that request or for them to go and open that child support case. I don't know if you guys know, but there's a national network of shelters across our nation, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline is answered 24 hours a day in multiple language, like 200
Wow.
plus languages. And wherever you call from within the nation, you can just tell them, I'm in this particular area, and they will direct you to the nearest shelter. And they never close, it's 24/7. Sometimes we have victims that have family members in other states or other parts of the state, and they're wanting to move over there. So we work within that network to try and get them to, let's say they're going to California. We'll contact the shelters in between those states until that victim gets to their destination and they can stay in those domestic violence shelters throughout their traveling. A lot of DV shelters offer gas cards and also bus vouchers if the victim doesn't have transportation. And CVC will also pay for their or reimburse them for their transportation for relocation. So in other words, there's many resources.
There's a lot of resources.
Yeah.
The other important thing is also when there is a protective order, they can apply for the address confidentiality program, and that is also done through the Texas Attorney General's office. What this does is it will protect the new address for the victim. It will remain confidential. They will get a PO box assigned to them. So from that point on, that's going to be their legal address. They can use it for voter registration, driver license. They will never have to disclose their physical address. And what the address confidentiality program does is they have those PO boxes and they receive the victim's mail and they reroute it to her physical address. So she'll still get her mail, but it goes through that process to keep that address confidential at all times. Another thing that is commonly used, especially with our cases that are very severe and that we know that there's a lethality risk or there's been previous attempts of either strangulation or anything like that, under the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which is a federal law that protects a lot of women that are being abused, the victim can request to change their social security number. So they will get a completely new number that the abuser cannot trace. And they can also request a name change as well. So those are used for extreme cases where we know that the victim is in total fear that this person is going to harm them. They can do that. They can go to the Social Security Administration and request their number to be changed. As long as they have a protective order, they have the right to do that under the VAWA federal law.
This is amazing. I mean, I just think back to like when I was there. Number one, we weren't trained in any of this. We did not know any of this. So I mean, I think the extent of what we did was try to make a phone call, try to figure some things out. But congrats. I think it's great that the district attorney's office has implemented this program. because it just opens up a wealth of opportunity and options for the individuals out there that are suffering from family violence. Wow.
And now y'all have made the change, because I was there as a prosecutor under both administrations, and I know Mr. Rodriguez had made a lot of really good changes to the office. A lot of focus went into this domestic violence unit, helping, you know, the victims unit specifically. Rosie, your unit or your department, you know, and I know now that there's even been more changes since I've left the office, now that there's actually advocates assigned to, is it each court or certain sets of courts? So now there's more help, or there's more resources within the office to help, you know, each of the victims, you know, that are coming to your office for help. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have an advocate per district court now. So the prosecutors have their own advocate that will help that victim navigate through any type of services. And we don't just do, right now we're talking about domestic violence, but our advocates also assist with victim impact statements, restitution, anything that's happening during the process of the prosecution. If the victim wants to do an allocution, or they want to say something at time of sentencing. We also do post-sentence services, so that when the case is disposed, whether it goes to probation or prison, we make sure that the victim understands the process. If the person is sentenced to prison, we work in conjunction with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to continue on with services, and we register them for their own, they have a notification system within TDCJ that will let the victim know if the person was released, if they're eligible for parole, who they can contact if they want to be part of the parole hearing. So there's a lot of other stuff that happens post conviction.
What are some of the things that you look for when you decide to not proceed with protective order? Like what is it in the facts, or what is it that you see that you say, you know what, no, this is not going to rise to the level of needing a protective order?
We do get a lot of people who come in here and apply for a protective order because they're asking for child support, because they're asking for custody, and it doesn't meet the level of a protective order. There's no family violence, no sexual assault, no stalking. So we do take their application, we review it, but because they're not, there is no the requirements aren't there to file a protective order. There's no physical violence or anything like that. So then we still take their application, but we refer them out. We'll call legal aid. We have the direct number to legal aid, so we'll call them and let them know that we're sending them over there. We'll call the AG's office and let them know that, you know, this person needs assistance with child support. So although we have many people who apply, some of them are not going to qualify because it doesn't meet the level, doesn't meet the elements for a protective order itself.
Wow.
And we also have information that we give them of other possibilities or other ways of them to attain a protective order, like with a private attorney or even pro se or Texas Advocacy Project. There's other legal aid services across the state that will assist the victim to get a protective order if our office cannot handle that protective order. So,
and how many attorneys, Amy, work there with you as well that work in the domestic violence unit?
So before Mr. Rodriguez started, it was only two of us, Belinda Ansaldua and myself. So I've been here for 16 years. So for at least 10 years, there was only two of us doing this. And it was a lot. It was a lot of work. Since Mr. Rodriguez has started, we now have 6 prosecutors, and that's all we do. We review applications every day. We prosecute protective orders. We prosecute domestic violence cases. So having 6 prosecutors in our unit has helped us a lot.
And we have 18 advocates that assist through that process.
Wow. 16 years of the DA's office. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Richard, how many years did you put in?
Quick 2, you know.
No, I mean, being a prosecutor is very taxing on the soul, and I can imagine just being in that particular department. What keeps you going 16 years into this particular division?
I mean, this is what I love to do. I've dedicated my career. I mean, as when I graduated, this is where I started, and I have dedicated my career to helping victims, all victims. And I love what I do, and this is what keeps me going.
Do
The
you
passion that a passion that I have for it.
do you have any cases or any particular that stick with you or have stuck with you throughout the years?
A lot of cases, a lot. I mean, I guess just to give an example, and this was many years ago. I think she was raped. She was sexually assaulted by several individuals, and they were all sentenced to about 20 years. There was 4 of them, and they were sentenced to 20 years. And 20 years later, they came out and they looked for her.
Oh,
And
wow.
so she came in, she applied for a protective order, and we got that protective order against all of them. And so, yeah.
That's
wow.
crazy.
Right. And so we were
Wow.
able to get a lifetime protective order for her because, that's one of the cases that we can actually request a lifetime protective order for.
Well, now okay, Amy, you kind of, I want to circle back to something you talked about earlier between a temporary protective order and a lifetime. I guess my 2 questions are: how long is a temporary protective order enforceable? And number 2, what are the requirements in order to meet the criteria for a lifetime protective order?
Okay, so every person who comes through our office, once we accept your case, we're always going to file a temporary protective order, and the judge will sign that. That's going to last 14 days. So every 14 days we go to court, and like I said, some cases take a little bit longer to finalize than others, but that person is always going to be protected. As soon as the judge signs the order, that person will be protected. So temporary protective orders will be 14 days at a time. A final protective order, if you're a victim of domestic violence, family violence, or dating violence, then it's only going to be for 2 years. If you're a victim of a sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, then that's going to be a lifetime protective order.
Hmm.
If you've had 2 protective orders and this is the 3rd time that you're applying for a protective order, then we can request a protective order for more than 2 years. If that individual committed a felony offense towards you, then we can actually request a protective order for more than 2 years also. So this helps the victim so that they're not constantly having to go to court every 2 years.
And the important thing about protective orders is that it protects the person, so they can take their protective order wherever they go nationwide. They don't have to go out there, like let's say that they move to another state. They don't have to file another protective order over there. They take the current court order that they have and they just go, and it should already be in the system because those get inputted in the TCIC and NCIC. But just so that we make sure that the police department where they're moving to knows, we recommend for the victim to take a copy of their protective order to the local police department. So it protects the person, not the address, and that victim can take that protective order with them wherever it is that they're going to relocate.
And if they don't have a copy of their protective order, do law enforcement agencies still have access to it?
Yes, they do. All the information gets entered into TCIC, so any law enforcement agency can look up that protective order and they can see a copy of it. And that's everywhere. I mean, we've had people arrested on their way back from Mexico because they're together and there's a protective order in place.
And how does that work? I mean, that we're here on the border and we have certain people who are maybe going to and from Mexico. Is there any way that the protective order applies over there, or they get any assistance through that?
It doesn't apply in Mexico. It only protects them here in the US. So if they do need assistance in Mexico, I would think they would need to contact the law enforcement agencies there.
And if they take them with the purpose of continuing to commit family violence against them in another country or another state, there's federal laws under the Violence Against Women Act that they will be able to do something if, let's say, that the abuser takes them to Mexico just for the purposes of committing more acts of violence against them, thinking that nothing's going to happen. If there's a protective order in place, there's still some federal laws that protect you under the Violence Against Women Act.
No, there's a few things that if I can, Victoria, that I wanted to add, because I know there's a lot of myths out there and some people are confused about protective orders. So I just wanted to, tell everybody that a protective order is not the same thing as a restraining order. They are totally different. A restraining order is filed with a custody case or a divorce, and it's not, the police cannot arrest a person if they violate a restraining order. You'd have to go back to court so the judge can hold them in contempt. So the good thing about a protective order is that you are going to get arrested if you violate that order. Another thing is that people believe that if you're undocumented, that we're not going to help you. That's not true. And nowhere in the code does it state that you have to be a citizen. We accept applications from every person. Another thing is that, even if you haven't filed a police report, we're still going to look at your case. An affidavit alone is going to be enough for us to look at your case to determine whether or not we're going to accept your case. And I know people believe that it's just a piece of paper. It's not. It's not just a piece of paper. It's a court order with criminal consequences. So I just want people to understand that you can be arrested for violating this order. It is an effective tool, and I talked to Rosie last night and we discussed this issue. It's not the only tool that our victims have, but it is an effective tool.
It's just an additional layer of protection that we highly use and recommend to try and have more safety for that victim. But just the minimal stuff that we talked to today about, there's way more other things that we can do to be able to help this victim get out of an abusive relationship. But when it comes to protections, we do that. And we also recommend a lot the emergency protective order, which is a different type of protective order that's only given at time of arrest. So if there is an arrest made in the case, we recommend for the victim, and some of the police departments are also doing that as a standard process already. Whenever they have an arrest on family violence, they are requesting the emergency protective order, and that gives the victim a window of 60 to 91 days to be able to petition for the permanent one through our office. So that way they don't fear that, where I'm going to be without protection all this time while I go through the legal system.
And another thing that we haven't mentioned, when there's an issue and it's family, there's children involved, how does that play a role in the protective order? Are children be included if it's a parent that's asking for one against another parent?
Yes, and just to add a little to that, any person can file a protective order on behalf of a child who is a victim. A lot of times the parents don't want to file, so we have CPS filing on their behalf. We file on their behalf sometimes also if the parent doesn't want to protect their child. But if the child is not a victim in that case, once we go to court, we are going to ask the court to issue orders regarding custody, child support, property, and although they are just temporary orders, it will alleviate the situation. The court can grant, custody visitation, order temporary child support, and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of the times the court will order supervised visitation for children in a safe setting. So that is also implemented through the protective order. If the victim fears that the child will be in danger, I know that they will request supervised visitation or the exchange of the child to be done in one of those child exchange safe places that have been implemented in our county. So we always try and determine what is the safest way or what protections we can add to that protective order.
Am I mistaken, but didn't you guys get some kind of an award or some type of recognition not too long ago?
Right. We have received a lot of accolades and recognitions, awards for the work that we have done in the past 5 years. And just so you guys know, all the stuff that we do is through grants. So this is not costing the county any type of funding. We applied for grant money that is available specifically for victim services. So that's how we've been able to manage and create this awesome victims unit that we've already served over 30,000 victims in our office since we started 5 years ago. And it's a very important, we're not doing this because we want to be good to victims. They have a right to get all this services and information. That's part of our victims' rights. And so we have been recognized at the national level. I serve in the executive board for the National Organization for Victim Assistance, which is the oldest victim services agency in our nation. So we aside from all the direct service that we do, we also do a lot of public policy work when it comes to victims' rights and any type of legislation that will affect a victim. So we're part of committees and boards and other with the state and the national level, so that we make sure that whatever we're implemented down here is the right thing to do to be able to assist victims.
Awesome. Amy, can you give us the number to the office again so that way our listeners can have it?
Yes, it's here to our domestic violence unit. It's going to be 956-292-7613. And just one thing to add, Victoria, is, you know, even if you have a protective order, we always ask that you still be careful. You know, if there's any extra steps that you need to take, you know, always be on guard. If you feel something's not okay, call the police, install cameras, talk to your neighbors so that they can let you know if they see anything unusual outside your house, but always be on guard.
That's really well, guys, thank you so much. We really appreciate all the information that you provided. Like I said, there's so much information that I didn't even know, you know, and having worked in the office, and I know Richard, same thing. So much has changed with the unit and with everything that Mr. Rodriguez has done with the office. And I know the victims in this community really do appreciate that they do have resources and they have people like you all to help them.
But ladies, you both are you truly are lifesavers and leaders in this community. And so on my behalf, and I'm sure on Victoria's behalf, we just want to say thank you to the both of you for all the hard work that you do. And a special shout out to our DA, Mr. Rick Rodriguez. Thank you so much for allowing Rosie and Amy to come on. And if you're listening, thank you for all the hard work and for implementing these domestic violence programs and you know, keeping our community safe. So thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you. Yes, thank you guys for having us.
We really appreciate it. And I'm sorry that I couldn't get Richard to wear a more professional t-shirt today.